Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and welcome to my writing space. We're here on another Thursday where I'm going to be reading the 20th chapter of my book, The Shadow of the Past. Hope you enjoy. Please, on your thoughts on the story, my reading, characters, action, everything like that. I would really appreciate your comments down below. It also would be amazing and help out the channel if you were to leave a like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, as well as check out my website, socials, my books. Those are linked down below. That would be awesome. So last chapter, I'll just do a quick recap. Ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Is Val'inar has returned to the city of Takaran, the capital of the Telmaran Union, and he has come to. Nope, Telmaran Union's the bad guys. He's come to the capital of Camral, which is Takaran. Yeah, you think the number of times I've read this and all the writing and editing I go through, I'd remember this. But and he's been working to try to get the the city to side with him and rise off to throw out the Telmaran Union, which is taking control of the city and by some extension Camral. And being opposed by the newly arrived Commander Bivare, who he had previously fought with when he liberated Romalda, the Duchy of Romalda, from the Union's grasp. After some back and forth and tension between them, Bivare challenged Val'inar to a Duel of Honor, preventing Val'inar from using his magic. Luckily for him, on the verge of winning the fight due to his superior experience and physical strength. Bivare got overconfident and underestimated the elf's speed, and did get killed by him, and ended with ordering his soldiers, in defiance of what a Duel of Honor is supposed to be, to kill Val'inar. And the chapter ended with a half dozen Union soldiers pushing their way through the crowd and firing their arrows at Val'inar. So here we are, chapter 20, Uprising in Preparation. To all those watching, Valinar's form seemed to blur as he spun around, holding his left arm out with his palm facing outward toward the arrows flying towards him. As he did so, a sudden gust of air seemed to go tearing across the dueling square, which shredded the arrows, leaving ruined bits of wood to clatter harmlessly onto the stone. For a moment, silence reigned supreme in the courtyard of dancing stones. Some glared in anger at the Union soldiers who dared defy their most ancient customs, but most stared in wonder at Val'inar, standing stock still with his arms still outstretched and sword at the ready. Power seemed to radiate from him. He now seemed taller and stronger than the elf who had barely avoided death by capitalizing upon a mistake of his foe. When the silence ended, chaos took its turn to rule. Commander Bivare's sergeant began shouting orders at the soldiers to kill Val'inar and arrest his supporters, but her calls were soon drowned out by shouts of indignation against the Union soldiers and cheers in support of Val'inar. A burst of fire from Urgar dealt with two of the bowmen before they could even draw another arrow from their quivers. The crowd parted for them as they ran blindly around, trying to put their now blazing clothes and bodies out, screaming as they went. The other four were in the process of notching fresh arrows into their bows when they were tackled by a group of bystanders. A dozen Union soldiers burst from the crowd and made a charge at Val'inar, but only 3 made it far enough to cross blades with him, as the rest were intercepted by Knights of Shadow and members of the crowd wielding makeshift weapons. The 3 fell quickly, their opponent no longer restricted by honor from using his power. Calm, albeit a tense one, was restored when Bivare's retinue had all either been killed or scattered. The crowd turned, faces variously etched with concern and anger and confusion towards Val'inar for guidance. The Union forces in the city will not have expected Bivare to lose, Val'inar began in a loud voice. Although they no doubt have plans for a rising of the city in place, it is we who have the advantage. Our first priority must be to secure the city. Deimos? Yes, Val'inar, responded the prince, stepping forward from the crowd. Take the Knights of Shadow and head to the citadel, commanded Val'inar. If you move quickly, you might be able to capture most of the Union's leadership within the city. Urgar. Here, bellowed the goblin. Go with Deimos. Once you have taken the citadel, signal our allies as to what has happened, ordered Val'inar. The rest of you send the fastest among you to raise the city. The rest of your arms The rest of you arm yourself as best you can and come with me. We are heading for the Horseman's Square. The Union likely will be grouping at their barracks. Move! With a ragged but hearty cheer, the crowd dispersed. A group of men and women dressed in black and grays formed around Damus and Urgar, and once the number seemed to satisfy the prince, they set off at a brisk pace towards the citadel. Val'inar had taken the precaution of having his armor brought, and took the brief lull in action to don it. Those that lived the closest returned within a few minutes. Most were well armed with swords, shields, axes, hammers, and bows, but the armor varied, with most wearing nothing more than boiled leather for protection. Shouts and cries were going up across the city as the runners called the men and women of Takaran to action. Once about 20 armed men had gathered in the dueling square, Val'inar led them towards the Union barracks, their ranks swelling as they went. Whenever they encountered Union patrols, Val'inar took the lead, knowing they could not harm him, but had likely been ordered to kill him if they saw him. And once he had engaged them, they were easily dispatched by the growing throng of supporters he had at his back. The Union had formed their ranks in the Horseman's Square by the time Val'inar had arrived, and the same sergeant from the dueling square was making his speech to them about their duty to the Union to quell this uprising. As the Union soldiers saw the approaching mob and prepared themselves for battle, Val'inar stretched forth his mind and began weaving the strands various so that just as he and his followers rushed to meet their foe, it seemed as though the whole square had come alive. The pavement heaved up and great roots started lashing out at the Union soldiers. Blasts of fire and gusts of wind tore through the ranks here and there, while the water of the fountains and the shadows themselves seemed to rear up to attack the soldiers. By the time Val'inar and the people of Takaran reached the Union soldiers, they were in complete disarray from this onslaught of magics they had never seen before and fell quickly before their foes. A few pockets of determined soldiers overcame their fear and fought in an organized fashion, but none could withstand the elf. In a few moments, it was all over. The main Union force in Takaran was broken. Most of the soldiers lay dead or severely wounded in the square, although a few managed to escape and fled from the city. Val'inar reflected that it might have been better to stop this flight if they could have, but ultimately he figured that at most it would have bought them an extra day. Still, there was much work to do, as his keen hearing could pick up the shouts and clashes of battle and skirmishes going on throughout the city. As they had retrieved their proper arms and armor from the Union barracks where it was being kept, Val'inar dispersed his forces to clear out what few remaining strongholds of Union soldiers were still in the city. He went himself with a small group to ensure that the capture of the citadel had gone well. When he arrived, he discovered that his allies had in fact been successful, although not as overwhelmingly as he had been. Several of the Knights of Shadow lay dead, and Damus had a minor cut on his left arm. They had captured the Union ministers who had been governing the city since the death of Ertol III, whose simple grave Val'inar found Damus standing before and looking solemn. Under duress, the ministers had informed Damus of the houses and shops that had been fortified with Union soldiers, as well as those nobles and select members of the common people who had sided with the Union, prompting Damus to dispatch some knights to inform their forces in the city where to look. While they were reviewing the tactical situation in the city, Urgar returned from where he had gone for the quiet that was required to work the Partak, and informed them that their allies had been notified. Lady Myra was in the process of mobilizing her forces and began moving towards the city and would be there within 5 days. Narthan much the same, and a force of Tri riders would arrive within an hour. The main host of the Tri was some 3 days hence, although they would wait until their other allies arrived, since on their own they would be of little use against the Union army. We need to decide what to do with all the people who cannot fight that are in this city even now, observed Damus. Even if it lasts only a few days, a siege will do great damage to the city, and there are many thousands who are not soldiers and are not equipped to be so. Val'inar nodded in agreement at this statement and studied the map of the city for a time before speaking in response. We cannot make any plans for the defense of the city until we know exactly what the disposition of our forces within the city is. I have already ordered my knights to assemble all those who are willing and able to fight or help in the defense, said Damus. We should have an accurate count in a few hours. Good, mused Val'inar. Good. What of mages? I have grown strong, but I cannot be everywhere at once, and I must direct my power carefully lest I do more damage to Takaran and the Union. The enemy is bound to have a fair number of mages with them that will need to be countered as well. There is a small group in the city, replied Damus. The main academy is in the city of Corlin, some ways to the south. And once they complete their studies, most mages stay, but there's a well-respected guild chapter within the city. The citadel itself is well protected from magecraft. That is well known, but I confess that I do not know how well the main wall of Takaran is shielded from such attack. I can sense within the area the great strength of the enchantments within this citadel's walls, said Val'inar. I am not sure that I could even break them. There is nothing that will stop them from firing things over the ramparts, however, and the gates do not nearly have the same protection. It would take a great amount of time to break the door down, but it would be done eventually. As for the outer wall, I detect enchantments, but not nearly the strength as the citadel. They would have little trouble scaling the walls or smashing down one of the many doors. For a citadel so justly famous for its strength, chuckled Urgar, there seems to be many points of attack. It is in its millennia of existence, the citadel of Takaran has never once fallen to assault, observed Damus. But you are correct, my good goblin. Time breeds arrogance, as it does anything else. In all likelihood, the enchantments on this place have not been renewed in a great count of years. You are correct, interjected Val'inar grimly. I sense great age in these enchantments. The area, always shifting, always changing, does not stay in even the most carefully woven pattern forever. And the more use that is given to whatever has been enchanted, the quicker it shall come undone. The siege could last for years before it wears down enchantments in the walls as they are stationary, but the gates have lost much of their potency, so that even simple physical force would break them down now. As they were finishing this discussion, one of the knights hurried into the room and informed them that a group of riders had been sighted out to the west and were approaching the city at great speed. After confirming with the soldier that those riders did not bear the markings of the Union, Damus dispatched the soldier to the eastern gate to admit the new arrivals and conduct them to the citadel. After they had made sure that it was not some elaborate deception. While they waited, Val'inar availed himself of the opportunity to survey the surrounding plains from the top of the citadel. His eyes could see far on the Shadai plain, but not through hills. He knew that the Union army was probably already on its way, likely having found out in the same manner as his allies had. But despite their vast number, their camps were in the northern hills, which were sparsely covered by forest. Once that great host was sighted, he would have a few hours at most to finalize their preparations for defense. Taking in the sight of the vast golden plain to the west and the rolling hills to the north, south, and east, Val'inar allowed himself to become lost in thought and free himself for a few moments from the burdens which were weighing heavily upon him. As he let his mind drift away from the here and now, as he sometimes did, he saw it, the scar in the world, the great yawning rip in the terra itself, which seemed to go down forever, that haunted his dreams, had not diminished, but he no longer feared it. It did not seem to begin gaping wide as it so often did in dreams. So he looked closer, and as he did so, it seemed to pull him in. Just as he was about to plunge into the great chasm, he found himself on a barren and rocky field. The sky above seemed the same as it had had at the chasm, but it was like looking through a distorted glass. The light of the sun, the clouds, everything seemed warped and twisted, as did the mountains and grassland in the distance. He was aware that he was a few feet away from 6 towering oblong stones arranged in a circle. The stones, all of which rose to several times his own height, all pulsed with energy and were covered with etchings. Val'inar was not sure why this was, but had to guess that he would. But if he had to guess, he would say that it was part of the enchantment which kept Kiral and his followers imprisoned. After a few moments of staring at the stone, Val'inar became aware of the fact that his consciousness seemed attached to a body, seemingly his own, but that he had no control over it. As he advanced upon the stones, he saw another figure there studying the stones and muttering to itself what he could not hear. As he continued to approach, the figure noticed his presence and moved into the light. It was Ushara. She advanced upon him with the razor smile she had treated him with in the Toranu forest, an event which now seemed so long ago. She was speaking to him, but he could not comprehend the words, and although he could feel his own mouth moving, he was unaware of what he was saying either. They talked for some minutes until finally Ushara seemed to have enough. The smile never left her face, but Val'inar witnessed her entire visage changed. No longer was there an exotic and beautiful woman before him, but instead it was something else. Her face twisted and elongated, and she seemed to grow in height. Her arms and hands and figures all elongated into thin, almost razor shoots. Her once mesmerizing yellow eyes now burned hot as suns, and the smile seemed to be stuck on her face. From the crackling energy building up around her, even one who was not attuned to the area could have seen plainly the great power she was summoning. After a long and terrible moment, during which all he could hear was Ushara's high, cruel laugh, she struck, and the last thing he saw was the burst of raw power twisting and folding about itself, streaking straight at him. My Lord Valin, the Gar sent to fetch him, had just enough time to duck as Val'inar whipped around, sword in hand, as his consciousness lurched from that horrible vision. Once he saw that he was no longer in any danger, he sheathed his weapon and apologized to the shocked guard, who was trembling so much against the edge of the rampart that his armor rattled. The guard then informed him that the Tri had arrived and were awaiting him in the great council chamber. Val'inar followed the guard down from the top of the citadel to the room which was the central hall of the citadel, behind which was the throne room. There was a great wooden table with many chairs around it, which looked to be made up of many smaller pieces at the center of the room. At the moment, a map of the kingdom of Cameral was spread out upon it, with carved figures to indicate the presumed positions of both the enemy forces and those of their allies. Upon entering the room, Val'inar first noticed that one of the Tri, who seemed familiar, leather clad with a bow upon his back and a spear in his hand, with a green ribbon tying back his dark hair and bound around his right arm, was deep in conversation with Damus over the map and was indicating to him the exact position of the enemy forces. A little further away stood a cluster of women of varying ages, all clad in skins and carrying staffs with a variety of crystals embedded in them. This surprised Val'inar, since he was under the impression that Quar rarely left their own tribes, and even more rarely did so many of them come together in one place. This was nothing compared to the shock that Val'inar received once this group of Quar had noticed him, since from the center of the group strode Desalia. She approached him quickly and with but a second's hesitation embraced him briefly before backing away to a more social distance. You had best know what you are doing here, Val'inar, insisted Desalia, for I have staked everything and more upon you. If you fail me, then your enemies will have to learn to raise you from the dead to take their vengeance upon you. Val'inar smiled warmly at you. I shall do my best, Desalia. It is good to see you once more, and you as well, Gilf. May I ask how many men are you with you? Gilf turned from his discussion with Damus and answered the question. We have 400 horse with us at the moment, if one includes the scouts that are scattered to the north to give us ample warning of the Union Army's approach, as well as the corps who could be spared from our main force, which approaches as we speak, but will not be here in time to reinforce your garrison before the siege begins. Damus chimed in his own information at the end of Gilf's report. My men have counted all those who are able and willing to fight. They report we have some 50 armored knights, 10 times that number of men-at-arms, about 8 score bowmen and another 200 or 300 who have the arms of a soldier and the skill to use them, but are not part of the regular army garrison. On top of that, I have about 2 dozen mages worth the name and some 500 or so who are not soldiers but have other useful skills and are willing to stay. Unfortunately, the Union did its job in dispersing our armies through Cameral very well. I have sent word throughout Cameral that the quickest reinforcements would take a week to mobilize, and 2 months at least to gather all of Cameral's armies together. Val'inar nodded grimly at this news. That is about as I expected from all that you have told me of the Union's tactics in controlling Cameral. So we have about 2,000 soldiers to defend Takaran, if one includes the Try, against an army many times that number. How many civilians are still in Takaran, and did you know what kind of equipment the Union forces are bringing with them? Desalia spoke first. The Union force is bringing a great many siege engines with them, and we saw many mages as well. They have been there on your border waiting for some time in case they were needed, more than enough time to prepare. As to your first question, continued Damus, there are some 15,000 civilians which are still inside Takaran. Fortunately, while Takaran is the seat of our king and our greatest fortress, it has never had a great population. Many have left already, fearing unrest. Well, said Val'inar without hesitation, while we've still got them here, have everyone that is able to do so, both soldiers and civilians, collect all the food and supplies that are within the city, and transfer them into the citadel. Damus gave the order without hesitation, but after his soldiers had left the room to carry out his orders, he turned to Val'inar. And what purpose does that serve? Val'inar responded without hesitation. We need to make sure those supplies do not fall into the hands of the Union. Why would they? Inquired Urgar. Because we are not going to defend the city itself, stated Val'inar matter-of-factly, and to the shock of all those in the room. While everyone was shocked, Damus was understandably annoyed. What do you mean we aren't going to defend Takaran itself? Takaran is far too large for the forces that we have, Prince Damus. They have been preparing for some time to march on Takaran, and their mages and engines of war are specifically designed to break your outer wall. The city, on the other hand, could be held for a great length of time, even by fewer than the number you have, providing the enchantments held up. Damus begrudgingly acknowledged that this was a sensible plan, as was making sure that in taking the city, the Union did not find anything they could use. As Damus departed to oversee the initial stocking of the citadel, Val'inar turned to discuss matters with Gilf and Desalia about what to do with the civilians that were still in the city. They had decided on a plan when Damus returned an hour later. Damus, Gilf began with a bow of acknowledgement on his return. We believe we have a fair way for your civilians to escape from Takaran without further danger to their lives. I pray tell what this way is, inquired Damus. We must get them out, replied Desalia. 100 of my riders shall be dispatched to screen their movements as they head for Corlan. Only 100, grumbled Damus. Surely that is not enough to defend such a great number of civilians. Relax, Damus, Val'inar reassured him. Your people will not need to be defended, and 100 riders is more than enough to screen their movements. How is that? Damus inquired. The Union has a very small amount of swift cavalry, said Desalia. They will certainly attack your civilians if seen, but none of their raiding parties will be large, and the 100 we shall send, plus the many scouts we have scattered round these plains and beyond, shall dispatch those riders with ease. Do not worry, Lord Damus, you have my word that your people shall come to no harm, while they are under the protection of the Try. My thanks to you, Triquire Desalia, bowing deeply. I hope we do not end up regretting sending 100 of your men away. We will not, said Val'inar. This battle will not be decided by numbers, and if it is, we stand no chance. Our goal is to hold out until our allies can bring their armies onto the field. If we can somehow manage for our allies to avoid detection until they are ready for battle, we might be able to trap the Union's entire force. At most, we should not have to endure the siege for more than 2 or 3 days, with luck, of course. Indeed, before all the supplies are stored, I shall pass the word around that all those who are not staying to fight or aid in the fight should take what supplies they need and be at the south gate at dawn tomorrow. To which Damus added under his breath as he left the room, and I thought politics was dangerous and complicated game. Reports were still coming in of some limited fighting throughout the city, but it looked as though most of the Union soldiers had either been killed, captured, or fled. Those few that had helped the Union were led into the citadel in chains, and foremost was an overweight weasel of a man that grated upon the nerves of all present. He all but groveled, trying to plead their case, but in the end Val'inar decided it was the best to place them in the cells and allow the people of Cameral to deal with them later. Val'inar reflected in appreciation that he watched as he watched them being marched away, that after the Union's flagrant violation of an ancient tradition of Cameral, a majority of the city had openly declared for his cause and revolted in the Union. Once Sir Damus had returned, everyone gathered around the table to discuss the defense of the city. They began by designating several large rooms on the main floor of the citadel, including much of the strategy room, to be used as a place to treat the injured, which would soon fill it. Rooms in some of the upper floors were set aside for those who would volunteer to weave bandages and make medicines for the wounded, as well as those who spent their time fletching arrows. As soon as the space had been assigned, all three groups began their work. In the sheltered back courtyard of the citadel, facing the stark cliffs at the edge of which Cameral, the citadel, was located, and thus notably more protected from attack, were set up those blacksmiths which had stayed to help in the defense, as well as several experts in the care and repair of leather armor as well. No sooner had they gotten set up when all of them had a line of nervous and eager soldiers looking to get their arms and armor tended to before the fighting started. Especially those who were not part of Cameral's army, but were instead wielding various and not uncommonly ancient family heirlooms. The still well-stocked armories of the citadel provided replacement arms and armors for those that needed it, but even then a blacksmith was needed to modify the armor to best suit its wearer. The mages were tasked with spending the next several days weaving spells about the ramparts of the citadel, with the hope that the enchantments could at least mitigate some of the projectiles and spells that would soon tear through the air above the citadel. They had been stationed atop the citadel itself. They would be stationed atop the citadel itself to cast spells at range when the time for battle came. The archers practiced continually in the time they had. The best shots from among them would also be assigned to the top of the citadel to take careful shots at the Union soldiers tried to assail the citadel. The rest would be stationed upon the outer walls of the citadel, save those who were allowed rest within. Realizing the siege would likely take several days, Damus organized the soldiers into small units so that during times when their presence is not required on the walls, at least some of the soldiers would be able to rest for at least a few hours. All agreed this would also help keep the soldiers' morale up as well. All were trained hard by the veterans while they waited, so that all of them would be in top form when the battle eventually began. Hoping that it would slow their advance considerably as well as allow them an opportunity to ambush the first attackers to approach the citadel, it was decided that Val'inar would, when the scouts reported that the Union was nearing the city, shroud Takaran in a great fog that would go undiminished by sunlight or heat, or any piece of magecraft that the Union would care to try. Val'inar was initially skeptical of this suggestion when Dasalia had made it, unused as he was to weaving the area to control weather. But with the presence of the river Parinus gushing forth into the deep ravine far below the eastward side of the city, Val'inar found it only a slight drain upon his power to create and maintain such a spell. Thus did the preparation continue for the rest of that day and the following two. At the end of the second day, after the uprising, the Tri-Scouts reported that the Union army had been sighted camping just beyond sight from the city. If they were able to set out at first light, they would be at the city about an hour after midday, or so the scout judged. Val'inar therefore arose just before dawn and put forth his power. The sun rose to find Takaran shrouded in a fog, so thick that only the very top of the citadel was still visible above it. Shortly after dawn, Valinar's keen eyes caught a glint of steel to the north, and within moments the vast host of the Union marched over a distant hill. The soldiers all appear to be fully armored with their banners and coats of arms, the rich purple of the Union emblazoned with the great eye. As they got closer, Valinar could see the great catapults and towering trebuchet and ballista being wheeled in the front ranks of the enemy force, as well as a great multitude of ladders. If the fog which enveloped Takaran gave them cause for concern, it did not seem to slow their pace any. Little by little, minute by minute, the great host of the enemy, like the slow ooze of syrup, spread itself towards Takaran, covering more and more and more of the land before them, and slowly spreading out to encircle the city. Valinar took a deep breath and prepared for the battle which was shortly to be starting. The siege of Takaran had begun. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back next week for chapter 21, the siege, appropriately named Siege of Takaran. I hope you all have. Please do leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. All of that would be wonderful and help me and the channel out. And check out my socials, my website, my books, all of that linked down below. All of that would be amazing. I hope you all have a wonderful day, get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I do hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one.